I just wanted to give you a really brief overview. You might be aware that Welsh Government issued a new guidance on performance management. So last year they reviewed the current performance management guidance, and at the end of March they issued what they're now referring to as professional development review guidance. If we can move to the next slide, thanks, Ed. So what I'm going to do over the next sort of 15 minutes is just to give you a bit of an overview of the key changes between the new, what's referred to as professional development review guidance. So that's the new terminology. So you'll hear me referring to PDR, and the old performance management guidance that was in place for head teachers and teachers. One thing I will say is there is no set date for implementation by schools. So when Welsh Government circulated this, the correspondence said that schools will be able to engage with the revised guidance at a time and in a way most effective for them. So you will probably be aware that we have a regional performance management policy currently in place within the region. This will be reviewed over this term and consulted on with trade unions as well to reflect the new guidance, with a view to circulating that to schools for adoption in the autumn term. So our advice from a regional perspective, and I liaise with the sort of 5 local authorities on this, is that just to continue under your current policy for this cycle, and implement the new guidance in the autumn term when the new policy will be in place. In terms of briefings, we've provided a similar overview of the changes to SIPs, and briefing sessions have also been arranged for the end of May, the beginning of June, for head teachers and senior leaders to attend. So if you wanted to highlight that to your heads at all, please feel free to. They can then book on to that. Thanks, Ed. So the key message, I think, is whilst there's a change in the terminology, and a few bits of changes in the process, there's no major changes to the process that you would be familiar with. It's still an annual process with a meeting to review progress and set new priorities. So no changes have been made to the actual appraisal regulations themselves. So there's still that statutory requirement to undertake the process for all teachers, including the head teacher within your school. What the new guidance does is it brings the arrangements in line with the developments in school improvement and the professional learning. So it's much more focused on aiming to support the profession to meet the current challenges and to ensure that all learners achieve their potential. So you can see what the main changes are that are listed on the slide. We've now got one guidance document for all practitioners. Where I refer to practitioners, that refers to anyone who's covered by the professional standards. So you've got teachers, senior leaders, head teachers, and now also teaching assistants. So previously we had separate guidance documents, one for teachers and one for head teachers, and there was nothing for TAs. So the inclusion of teaching assistants is one of the biggest changes in this particular guidance document. And I think it's important that as chairs of governors and governors in your role, is ensuring PDR processes are implemented within the school. So when you're getting those reports into your governing bodies in sort of over the next year, you will be able to confirm that all staff are benefiting from it. So it's not just focused now on teachers alone. Another big change, really, I think, is one of the biggest shifts is in the language and the terminology used and the focus of the process to be more around continuous professional development rather than performance management. And that's just bringing it in line with best practice. The changes highlight the principle that the individual should own their process and drive it with the support of their what they now refer to as their PDR partner or the PDR panel for the head teacher, which you will know as the appraiser or the appraisal panel previously. And in line with the developments in school improvement and professional learning, there's much greater focus in the new guidance on the use of professional standards to support the process and the principles of the learning organisation. So not lots of changes in the process, but just some changes in the terminology there. What this slide does then is I've just brought together the main changes in the terminology, so that'll give you the overview. As I said, all the same elements really are there, but the language has just been updated to demonstrate that collaborative nature of the process and the greater focus on professional development. You'll see the one thing that is a little bit newer is the professional development plan, because all that does is bring together all the current separate documents for recording, things like your objectives, your monitoring, your professional learning plan, and the practice development review record into one document, and we will ensure that there is a template for that in the policy as well. If we move on then to the next slide, what you'll see here, I'm not going to talk too much through this one. It's just to show that it is still that sort of ongoing cyclical process. You've still got that planning, monitoring and review. They're just called something slightly different, and in the same way as you probably do now when you have, if you're on that appraisal panel for the head teacher, the planning and review probably happens in the same meeting where you review the previous year and then plan for the following year, just in that two-stage approach in one meeting. Thanks, Ed. Another new element is the values. So they've added values into the guidance, and you can see from those values that you can see on the screen that there is a shift in the focus on the ownership of the PDR process, with that sitting with the practitioner. And a much greater emphasis on a collaborative approach. I think in lots of schools, this is how performance management does operate now. Lots of schools are up on that best practice, but it's just put in that guidance document. And it's important to note that the professional learning journey does need to link in with those school priorities as well. And I think one of the biggest challenges for heads where they may need support from governors on that is one of the challenges within that guidance is that there is that increased focus on providing sufficient time for practitioners to engage with their PDR processes and professional learning. There's a lot in the guidance about having that sufficient time. You'll see that it's in there on the values. And with this now incorporating teaching assistants as well as teachers, the planning to ensure that time's available for all might be one that's a bit of a challenge for heads to manage. Thanks, Ed. Okay, so from a head teacher PDR perspective, you can see that the makeup of the head teacher PDR panel remains the same as what is currently known as the appraisal panel. And within the region, it's the school improvement partner that's usually the appraiser appointed by the local authority. So where that middle box there, where it talks about an LA representative. You'll note the wording that it says it may also include one or two local authority representatives. That is a slight change to the wording in the previous guidance, which said the panel will, but the word may just reflects the wording now that's in the appraisal regulations, and it links to the fact that the local authority can choose to have a representative on the panel. So in line with the normal practice within our region, the SIP will still be that local authority representative. And they are a full member of that panel. So their role will be to provide that support, advice and guidance to governors on the panel on the process, talk you through any relevant information, answer any questions you might have, and provide that sort of educational perspective on the evidence relative to the progress of the head teacher against their development priorities. So in line with the regulations, the SIP must be present for all stages of the process because the regulations are clear that all panel members have to be there. So you'll still have that support when you go through that process of the SIP. Thanks, Ed. So I'm just going to go through the different stages within the policy very briefly. So you've got your development priorities, and these are what you would now know as objectives. That the new terminology for that is your development priorities. There's an expectation under the guidance that the practitioner has much more involvement in identifying development priorities, which are then discussed and finalised with the support of the PDR panel. In reality, I would say most head teachers already have that significant involvement in identifying and drafting their objectives, so it's not a huge change for the head teacher process. And the guidance highlights that the practitioner, which is the head teacher, and the PDR panel are expected to agree the development priorities, bearing in mind importance of autonomy and choice in this process, and providing practitioners with the opportunities to substantially affect and direct their priorities through practice and inquiry. So it's referring to that as being a powerful motivator. Like I said, I don't think that's a huge difference for head teachers because from my experience as a governor, but also my understanding from speaking to school improvement partners, the head will be fully involved and often comes along with their views on what their development priorities should be. The slide just outlines what you would expect of the head teacher coming in when they're thinking about development priorities. So you're expecting them to reflect on their current knowledge, skills, behaviours and experiences, and then identifying the needs of learners and or whole school priorities, setting out what they intend to learn, develop or do differently, and outlining that professional learning required to achieve that. So as part of the process, it's really important to encourage the head teacher to self-evaluate against the professional standards, to identify areas that they feel they might need to develop in. And there's a much greater focus on using the professional standards as part of the process and linking their professional development needs with those. One of the other things under the guidance is that heads can now identify shorter term development priorities or longer term that maybe require more than one academic year. So it doesn't have to be a 12-month timescale on those. Moving on to the professional development plan. So this replaces the documents that are currently used to record objectives, the professional learning and the practice review and development record. And what the guidance highlights is that all practitioners should be encouraged to try new approaches offered by professional learning they undertake. And that, together with reflection on the outcomes, will maximise the impact of that professional learning. And what that professional development plan does is it enables that professional learning and their reflection to be recorded. So there is reference in the guidance to using the professional learning passport. I know lots of schools have their own systems though for that. And the guidance also states that as part of the school becoming a learning organisation, head teachers are encouraged to create that culture of collaboration, trust and transparency in which practitioners share all or part of their professional development plans with colleagues. So it's just making it more of that learning from each other culture as well, and supporting shared professional learning. Professional support is something that's sort of a new section in the guidance. So there is reference to the provision of professional support in this way. It's a new development, like I said, and what the slide does is outline the expectations set by the guidance in relation to professional support. And this would be something that the head teacher would be entitled to have access to, but it's probably likely their professional support is likely to look slightly different to others within the school. So the expectation is the school will provide opportunities for practitioners throughout the year for this professional support to take place, allowing practitioners and groups to reflect, review progress and consider the effectiveness of their practice. And within that, sort of what they refer to as a continuous feedback loop, practitioners will also have that safe space to consider with others an aspect of the work that they might be struggling with. So it's also using it to share something that's worked well and might be of use of others. So it's all about learning from each other and having that sort of coaching and mentoring sort of processes as well. So for the head teacher, it's likely to be more aligned to discussion with their peers within their cluster maybe and beyond, mentors if they've been allocated, the school improvement partner, governors. So there's lots of people outside of the school itself as well that they may have that professional support from. And again, your school improvement partner might be able to help as well with reflecting on who might be appropriate for the head teacher in discussion with the head as well. So you've got reflecting on progress. So this is the section that was referred to as monitoring under the previous guidance. Obviously, how progress is reflected on and sustained needs to be agreed between the head teacher and the PDR panel at the beginning of the year in the same way as you would with any monitoring procedures. And the type of reflection that takes place will vary according to the development priorities that are set. There's much more focus now on professional dialogue and constructive feedback to reflect on progress. So holding feedback sessions to reflect on successes and focusing on maybe a specific area for further development can be something that takes place throughout the year. And with the link that's on the first slide, there's also access to case studies that indicate that some schools hold those sessions sort of termly with staff, or there's informal mid-year reviews. So there are some case studies available to look at on how other schools intend to use the PDR guidance. And I think, you know, that professional dialogue and constructive feedback, they're key elements on progress, on reflecting on that progress towards achieving the development priorities. Thanks, Ed. And then the final stage is that annual professional development review meeting. So, you know, in line with the appraisal regulations, the head teacher's process should be beginning in the autumn term, so between the 1st of September and the 31st of December. There's still a requirement to give the head 10 school days notice of the meeting, and the expectation is that the head teacher will have reflected throughout the year on their progress against the development priorities and must then share those reflections with the PDR panel at least 5 days in advance of the meeting. So you've got that information in advance. The guidance has moved away from the previous wording that stated that you will assess the extent the objectives have been met and determine whether there's been successful overall performance. And they refer to more of a summary approach, which you can see outlined on the slide. However, in essence, you are still assessing the progress made against the development priorities agreed, because you're looking at that progress and any factors that might have had an impact on the achievement. So it is still there. They've just used slightly different wording. And then following on from that, within 10 school days of that review meeting, the PDR panel will produce a brief summary of the discussion and the conclusions reached, which is what's referred to at the moment as the appraisal statement. And the PDR panel are still to share that with the head teacher within 10 school days, and the head can still add their own comments to that summary, and the requirement to keep that document then for 3 years in a confidential place within the school is still there as well. So not huge changes, but it might feel like that when you read the document, because it's set out in a very different way and the terminology is quite different, but the process itself is still very much the same.